A budget proposal for the state of Arizona disappoints many.
That's like penalizing somebody for doing the right thing, because those cuts have largely already been made. We're past the fat, we're past cutting muscle, we're cutting bone.
Cuts to K-12 education and to higher education. What's the plan moving forward?
These are not catastrophic cuts by any stretch, and we don't characterize them that way. The point, though, is that it's really the accumulation of the cuts that have been taking place over time.
This is Arizona Week. Hello, and thanks for joining us. Late last week, Governor Doug Ducey released his budget proposal for the 2015-2016 year. In it, large cuts to education, particularly higher education, an estimated $77 million. Joining me now is President of the Arizona Board of Regents, Eileen Klein, and Eileen joins us from Phoenix. Eileen, thanks so much for your time this morning.
Yes, glad to be with you.
Tell us, that $77 million you said is about a 10% cut from your operating budget. How exactly does that look? What does that look like when it comes to numbers?
So today the state is about a 25% funder of our higher education enterprise. It's quite different than before the downturn. So these cuts represent a significant reduction to our operating budget. So $77 million is about 10% of our operating funds. And it's, to us, a point where we really think we need to start a serious conversation with the state about the future of the university system.
Over the years, the universities have continued to take cuts. So moving forward, I think people might wonder, what does this do to tuition? Because in the past, tuition has gone up.
Correct. And so during the Great Recession, the universities lost over $400 million in funding. The reductions to Arizona public universities were among the largest in the country. And with that came corresponding significant increases in tuition. Again, the largest increases in the country. So ultimately, we know that reducing the state budget funds and replacing that with tuition is not a sustainable course. That cannot be the solution, and tuition certainly can't be the backstop for the state's fiscal challenges. So the point is, how do we go forward and make sure that we can keep our public universities affordable? I don't anticipate that these reductions will result in, dollar for dollar replacement by tuition by any stretch, but that's the process we need to go through to figure out exactly what these impacts will be.
A lot of students might be watching this unfold, and then they hear you say, we're going to have serious conversations. What do those conversations entail, and maybe how quickly will we maybe see some resolution to all this?
So we have started some conversations, the regents and the university presidents, with our new governor, Governor Ducey, and with our new legislative leaders to talk about exactly that. We need to make sure that we can get our universities on a sustainable funding course. So during the past couple of years, we were very pleased because the legislature was beginning to add dollars back to our public universities. So these reductions, while they're not catastrophic, they signal a challenge for us in that as the state continues to recover, and it's not recovering certainly as rapidly as we would like, we're concerned that universities are disproportionately seeing a reduction in funding. If you really look at the trends over the past decade or so, the trend is toward defunding our universities, and we need to reverse course on that. The state is an important partner, an important contributor, and our public universities are constitutional entities. So we need to have conversations about exactly what the contributions from the state will be in terms of real dollars and how we get those dollars distributed to the universities. It's a really, really important reform that needs to take place.
When you actually look at the numbers, you're talking about, as you said, a 10% operating cut. So maybe some people are watching this and thinking, well, that's not too bad, but if you would explain that it is significant.
Correct. And so it's certainly agreed. So these are not catastrophic cuts by any stretch, and we don't characterize them that way. The point, though, is that it's really the accumulation of the cuts that have been taking place over time and the continued reliance on tuition. That's the trend that needs to change. So what we're looking to do is clearly figure out how we can make reductions thoughtfully and in a way that does not impact access or affordability for our students. That has to be a top priority. But then ultimately we need to figure out, if the state can't contribute at the same level as before, what will the answer be? Our proposal is that we work on a performance-based funding model where the universities are recognized for their contributions to the economy, whether that be in terms of research or in terms of the number of graduates, but something that gives a definitive way and a concrete set of expectations and a certain funding level that the state will contribute at. That needs to be coupled, though, with some serious regulatory reform for our universities. Today, we are really largely tied to the state's architecture, whether that be through benefits design or reporting or a host of other regulations that really don't match with our current operating model. So we need to make advances there and combine these two thoughts, revamping our funding model and restructuring our regulations so that we have proper accountability, certainly, but that our universities really are freed up to be even stronger and more entrepreneurial enterprises.
On average, it costs an in-state student here in Arizona about $10,000 a year. For the students who are watching this and maybe becoming discouraged about their future and finishing their degree or starting an education program, what do you tell them?
Right. Well, certainly the average price that people perceive for tuition isn't exactly what anybody ultimately pays, because the universities work very hard to create financial aid opportunities for students and really make sure that our most needy students have the funding that they need available to them so that they can continue their studies. That commitment won't change. Our Board of Regents is very concerned about mitigating the trend of increasing tuition and trying to turn the tide on that. We're working very hard on efficiencies to keep costs down, but ultimately the message to students and families is that there is no better way to improve your future possibilities than pursuing higher education. If 2/3 of our jobs in the future by 2018 require post-secondary education, we need to make sure that our universities are strong, they're affordable, and they're positioned to provide the high-quality education that our Arizonans need.
Okay, Eileen Klein, President of the Arizona Board of Regents, thank you so much for your time. The budget cuts are likely to headline discussion in the state legislature. Representative Macario Saldana is on the Higher Education Committee and before taking public office worked at the University of Arizona. What were your initial thoughts when you saw the budget and the $75 million cuts to higher education?
A lot of concern, really. I mean, when you're talking about that amount of cut to the University of Arizona, which means right away what I think is the tuition going up again, and that's going to exclude a lot of students. And my concern is primarily this is a time that we should be investing in education, investing in a new future to attract better employers to Arizona, and that's not going to do it. That's just counterproductive in my way of looking at it. The university always has done, I think, not because I have worked there, but it's always been a leader in higher education, and that attracts and that transfers into technology that will attract employment, etc., and new development, and that's not going to help it. We need some support at the university levels, at all three institutions.
Your background is in higher education.
Yes, it is.
And you're on the committee here at the legislature. So what can you do right now as a state legislator to try and maybe change this, or what do you do?
Well, we're hoping to be able to, through our committees, for example, Higher Ed Committee, speak to the majority in control at this point and convince them that let's try to do more for higher education and community college, because community colleges also got a cut, and that both Pima, Pinell, Maricopa. Now that's another area where we shouldn't be cutting, because at this point they need all the support they can get to improve also the global training. As we talked on many aspects, both parties always are talking about the need for more training for a global society, for a very competitive society. We talk about Mexico having such a gigantic role now related to our economy. This is a time to begin to promote programs that will improve those conditions. I myself, for example, would be looking and am looking at, for example, the repeal of Resolution 203, which makes it against the law to use Spanish for Spanish speakers who have difficulty with English. But the idea is to promote languages, to promote cultures, to promote worldviews for the students that we're preparing, both at the community college and at the universities.
Community colleges have really grown over the last few decades. More sites, more availability, more options for people, even families. So perhaps maybe the system just got too big and the state can't sustain it? Is that a viable argument?
Well, I don't think so. I think it's not that it's too big of a system. It's because it's been a very popular system. There's a lot of students that ordinarily, many times non-traditional students, sometimes students would have difficulty going straight to a university, but it opened the door, and that door became open, and we have a lot of students participating. That is good. Let's support that effort. Let's make sure that we provide them the type of education, whether they're going to be going into a university or they're going into a profession that requires the training. It's a good thing.
There are people, even some of your constituents, who are probably saying this had to be done because the situation is so dire straight at the Capitol with our state budget. What do you tell them?
We need to improve in many ways, but higher education in other states, in other situations, are doing just the contrary. They're providing, you're investing some, and it's at a difficult time, but this is a time to make the investment so that we can compete with other states. It just it's that we have left it aside for so long, and it's time to take the move, the hard move, and invest and begin to see the returns. I think there's returns already coming through. The University of Arizona, for example, and the ASU, et cetera, Northern Arizona, are providing new technology, new inventions, new directions that are employing more people. But we haven't supported it, and in the last few years, it's had an impact.
Community colleges fall under higher education. Pima Community College has 6 campuses and is expected to take about a $3 million cut from the state. Here's my interview with Chancellor Lee Lambert.
When you look at our state aid budget, both based on our FTE calculation and our STEM components, we're looking at about $6.6 million. That all of that equates to. And then when you take 50% of that, which is the governor's proposal for us, which would mean we would have to reduce our budget by about $3.3 million.
Sounds like a lot of money. How do you manage?
So this has to be thought of in a larger context. Remember, just a few years back, the college took close to a $9 million state aid reduction. So now this is coming on top of that. So the why that is significant, when the college adjusted for that earlier amount, that means there are things that we did back then that are no longer available for us to trim around now. So as you take a series of cuts, then you're moving more and more into the muscle or the heart of the institution in some cases. So because some of your options are not available that were available before.
So students pick up the cost, or do you reduce services? What's the next step?
Well, there's different ways. You can control for it on the expense side, meaning, look at your current expenditures and try to adjust on that side, or you can look at the revenue side only and say, are there other sources of revenue where we can make up that reduction? So tuition and fees, certainly one of the options that are available to us, and certainly looking at the levy, the property tax pieces of the institution, and saying, depending on what that calculation is, so those two sources of revenue potentially could offset the reductions. But what it does not allow you to do is to really think or reimagine the organization. You're just treading water. You're taking away from here and replacing it over there, but you're not actually growing. You're not innovating. You're just transferring money from one place to another, but in shifting that cost burden to the student, as an example, that means the student's going to pay more. And so then you start to have other implications, right? So how's that going to affect access? Because if affordability is becoming less so, then that's going to impact your access, which then is going to impact potentially your enrollments downstream, which will have other kinds of implications.
Right now you have about 60,000 students, but enrollment is declining, you say?
Yes, so remember that 60,000 roughly number is all combined effort. But when we talk about the budget and so forth, we're usually talking about the FTE side, the for credit side of the house, and that number is certainly smaller than that number overall. And that's something not to lose sight of. So as we think about that side of the equation, and that's what drives our funding and revenue, the lion's share of it, if we can't keep numbers in a certain place, it will have other implications.
You've been here for, you said, 18 months, but this is not new to you in the sense that you've experienced this at college campuses before. So
right.
What are you sort of doing to rally the troops surrounding you right now to encourage them that, we can handle this?
Well, I think first of all is to communicate what's going on, to be as open and honest about the challenges that we're facing. Secondly is to put together a group who will start to develop a process along with criteria and a time frame for when we're going to make adjustments so that we can get as much input into how to think about areas of the college that we may have to re-engineer, if you will, in some cases. And so involving employees in that process, allowing even students to maybe have a way to input into the process as we rethink things. And so I think that's important. And so as part of this, what we did long before the governor announced his budget, we were already beginning the planning. Because I'm the kind of person, I really believe you have to try to anticipate what's going on and looking at the trends and so forth. And we were getting early indications, right? We heard about the challenges with K-12 and all that. So just taking that as an example, I knew that this was going to be a tough budget year that the new governor was going to face. So we went to the board before the end of last year and had them approve 3 dollar scenarios at a $5 million, $10 million, and $15 million. So based on that, now we're going to input it over onto the budget planning side that I mentioned earlier and start to develop 3 scenarios that start to come to a combination of reducing our budget by 5, 10, 15 million, or how do you mix in revenue as part of that overall mix. So we're well into that process.
You sound optimistic, but you're also using words like re-engineer or adjustments, which might signal potential cuts on your end, layoffs perhaps.
Well, so at this early stage of the game, it's hard to talk about specifics, but you have to have all the tools available to you. And that's the way I like to go into this. And remember, is this again in a larger context of cuts that have already been made years prior, as well as the fact that our enrollments have dropped significantly. And so, how do we account for that, especially from a stewardship standpoint? Yes, you have all of this, and maybe you can afford it all, but do you have the people coming to you who need your services and need the education? So you have to adapt to that regardless of how your financial health might be. And by the way, the financial health of the college, as of today, is very strong. We're in a strong financial position. That's always the place you want to be when you enter into these more difficult conversations and having to rethink and re-engineer, reimagine your organization.
To K-12 education now, the governor proposes about $160 million in new system-wide funding. But the president of the Arizona Education Association, Andrew Morrill, says the new funding comes with cuts that will run deep.
When I taught high school English, which I did for 17 years, you will do anything as an educator to keep your students out of harm's way. And when cuts come from the state, as they have in so many years in Arizona, repeatedly, school districts did whatever they could to deflect the impact of those cuts away from students in the classroom. As a result, they cut a lot of the very administrative costs that Governor Ducey's proposed budget seems to assume are still there. The fact is, Arizona is one of the leanest, most efficient states in terms of administrative costs in our K-12 system. We have some of the lowest costs. They account for some of the smallest budget percentages of any state in the country. That's why it was so disappointing to hear the governor identify those costs for a mandatory cut. That's like penalizing somebody for doing the right thing, because those cuts have largely already been made. We're past the fat. We're past cutting muscle. We're cutting bone.
The governor is putting some money toward education, some more money. Does that help or hurt? Does it matter anymore?
Well, the net gain it means almost nothing in light of the cuts, the loss of inflation funding for a 4-year period, deeper cuts even than that to the education system. It's important to remember that in the governor's proposed budget, for every dollar that is there being funded, a major portion, well over half of that, is coming back out in the form of cuts.
You mentioned waiting lists, and the governor talked about waiting lists, but you see waiting lists differently than probably his administration does.
Arizona has a waiting list that is larger than any that will be found in any other school system. We have a waiting list consisting of every student that's gone to Arizona's neighborhood public schools up through the 6th grade. Those students have been waiting to go to school in fully funded classrooms. Arizona has never fully funded its classrooms for a student in the 6th grade or lower. That is a waiting list of hundreds of thousands of students. The other waiting lists I hear about connected to charter schools, I've never seen them. I don't think anybody ever really has seen the math behind them. I guess I would tell those that put so much weight on those to show their work, offer up those waiting lists to the public eye. Let's take a look at those and what they mean. But I know a waiting list that is real, and it's the hundreds and thousands of students in Arizona's public schools that are waiting for fully funding.
Being a teacher, being in the classroom, being among the boots on the ground, what are the repercussions if the state continues to cut funding for education?
Empty classrooms. The answer is, how do you know that we are headed in the wrong direction in Arizona? We face one of the largest teacher shortages even this late into the school year that we've ever documented. People leaving in droves and leaving in tears because they can't afford to be in this profession the way they thought they could. They really don't feel that the state is a willing partner investing in their support, and they feel that the evaluation system and some of the other laws that have been passed, ironically at the same time the cuts came, we're almost setting them up for failure. And it took me a long time as an educator to understand how political public education has become. I never thought of that. I just thought everybody would be interested in my work educating students. A lot of educators don't understand why the state seems so dead set against their success. Because in the mind of a teacher or somebody who works in a public school, when they're successful, it means hundreds of students are successful. And we wonder, why wouldn't the state of Arizona be interested in that? We hear the right things from those we elect, but we don't see the right actions.
At the end of the day, these budget cuts, who do they really affect?
They hurt students. The budget cuts, as they have in every year, deprive Arizona students of opportunities and chip away a little bit at a time at their future. But against those cuts, you have the will of educators, the folks that continue to choose to work in our public schools. And unfortunately, the cuts also hurt parents. And here's the crushing irony to me. In a state that is rich in choice options, in a state that seems to have more choice options for schools than any other in the country, 85% of the parents in Arizona choose every year to send their students to their neighborhood public schools. Why are we not supporting that choice? Why are we not doing everything we can to support the #1 choice that Arizona's parents make when it comes to educating their students? It's as if policymakers are not happy with that choice or think that parents have made the wrong choice. Parents seem pretty clear that it's the choice they want to make. So I think we're all waiting for educators to be supported, for parents to be supported in the choice they make. We're waiting for our policymakers to support the overwhelming choice of Arizona's parents.
The Buzz now with my colleague Christopher Conover. And Christopher, the proposal is in for the budget. We haven't seen any fireworks in the legislature just yet, but we likely will.
We haven't seen fireworks, but we saw, well, maybe some sparklers, not full-fledged fireworks. Within the governor's budget, which we talked about last week, there was a line moving just under $1 million out of some veterans support money. It was money that Arizonans have donated to help out veterans and their families, the men and women coming back from Iraq, Afghanistan, and places like that. The governor wanted to take that money and move it over to pay for the veterans cemeteries that are in Sierra Vista. There's one being built in Marana and one being built in Flagstaff. When the legislature got word of that, members of his own party very quickly popped up and said, no, we don't think this is a good idea. Veterans groups started getting on the governor, and within about a day earlier this week, he reversed that, pulled it back, and said, we'll find the money for the veterans' cemeteries somewhere else. That money is being left alone. So no fireworks, but maybe some sparklers. Okay, and then moving on to higher education and education, I mean, we're likely to see that coming up in the next few weeks. We will hear all the budget things come up. We're about to start the committee hearings in the legislature in the coming weeks. They begin this coming week to look at the governor's budget and their own budget, because they have to meet in the middle somewhere. At the same time, in another week, the Arizona Board of Regents will be holding their regularly scheduled meeting. We know they're going to talk about the budget there. How could they not? It's the elephant in the room. So with higher education, we'll start to get an idea of what the Board of Regents really wants to do. We saw a reaction the day the governor issued his budget late in the afternoon. The university presidents and the Board of Regents all came out and said they were disappointed by what they saw. But now they've had some time to really look at it and think about it. That was kind of a knee-jerk reaction, if you will. Now when they're all together, we'll get a better look in the coming week or so of what they really think. How likely are we to see, for example, the $75 million to higher education be cut back dramatically, or $77 million, I think it is now. But how likely are we to see the governor say, okay, never mind, how about $30 million, for example? The governor's in a tough place because he still has that $1 billion shortfall, he and the legislature, $1 billion shortfall they have to deal with in the upcoming budget year. There are certain things that have to be funded, education being one of them. There are only so many places they can really cut. And $1 billion is a big chunk of the budget. Okay, Christopher Conover, a lot to look forward to in the next few weeks here. Certainly not any quiet times at the legislature. No. Okay, thank you for your analysis. And that's our program. Thank you so much for joining us. Be sure to tune in next week as we take a look at some of the issues surrounding immigration on the federal level and, of course, here along the border in southern Arizona. For all of us at Arizona Public Media, I'm Lorraine Brigada.